Pope John Paul I died suddenly in September 1978, 33 days after his election. Following contradictory reports about the circumstances of his death and apparent anomalies about the issuing of the death certificate and other procedures, several conspiracy theories have gained currency. Many of these concern the serious corruption in the Vatican Bank, Istituto per l'Opere Religiose, possibly linked to Freemasonry, which is forbidden by church law. None of the claims have been proven. Rationale: discrepancies in the Vatican's account of the events surrounding John Paul I's death. Its inaccurate statements about who found the body, what he had been reading, when, where, and whether an autopsy could be carried out produced a number of conspiracy theories, many associated with the Vatican Bank, which owned many shares in Banco Ambrosiano. Some conspiracy theorists connect the death of John Paul in September 1978 with the image of the bishop dressed in white said to have been seen by Lucia Santos and her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto during the visitations of Our Lady of Fatima in 1917. In a letter to a colleague, John Paul had said he was deeply moved by having met Lucia and vowed to perform the consecration of Russia in accordance with her vision. Conspiracy theories. David Yallop. David Yallop's 1984 book In God's Name proposed the theory that the Pope had been in potential danger because of corruption in the Vatican Bank, known officially as the Institute for Works of Religion or Istituto per l'Opere Religiose, the Vatican's most powerful financial institution which owned many shares in Banco Ambrosiano. The Vatican Bank lost about $250 million. This corruption was real and is known to have involved the bank's head, Bishop Paul Marcinkus, along with Roberto Calvi of the Banco Ambrosiano. Marcinkus, at the time head of the Vatican Bank, was indicted in Italy in 1982 as an accessory in the $3.5 billion collapse of Banco Ambrosiano. Calvi was a member of P2, an illegal Italian Masonic lodge. He was found dead in London in 1982, after disappearing just before the corruption became public. His death was initially ruled suicide and a second inquest ordered by his family then returned an open verdict. Upon publication of his book, Yallop agreed to donate every penny he made from sales to a charity of the Vatican's choice if they agreed to investigate his central claim, that when the body of the Pope was discovered, his contorted hand gripped a piece of paper that was later destroyed because it named high-ranking members of the Curia who were Freemasons and others who had a role in numerous corruption scandals and the laundering of mafia drug money. One of the names believed to be on the paper was that of Bishop Paul Marcinkus, who was later promoted by Pope John Paul II to pro-president of Vatican City, making him the third most powerful person in the Vatican, after the Pope and the Secretary of State. None of Yallop's claims, which are unproven, has thus far been acknowledged by the Vatican, although Yallop disclosed the Masonic lodge numbers of the Curia members whom he alleged to be Freemasons in his book. There is a papal ban of Freemasonry and it is forbidden by church law for a Roman Catholic to be a Freemason. John Cornwell. In his book A Thief in the Night, British historian and journalist John Cornwell examines and challenges Yallop's points of suspicion. Yallop's murder theory requires that the Pope's body be found at 4:30 or 4:45 a.m., 1 hour earlier than official reports estimated. He bases this, inter alia, on an early story by Vatican Radio and the Italian news service ANSA that garbled the time and misrepresented the layout of the papal apartments. Yallop claims to have had testimony from Sister Vincenza Taffarel, the nun who found the Pope's body, to this effect but refused to show Cornwell his transcripts. Abbé Georges de Nantes. Theologian Abbé Georges de Nantes spent much of his life building a case for murder against the Vatican, collecting statements from people who knew the Pope before and after his election. His writings go into detail about the banks and about John Paul I's supposed discovery of a number of Freemason priests in the Vatican, along with a number of his proposed reforms and devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. Lucien Gregoire. Lucien Gregoire's highly speculative investigations into the sudden death of John Paul I claim to derive authority from an assertion that he personally knew Albino Luciani, through his own friendship with Luciani's personal assistant, whilst Luciani was Bishop of Vittorio Veneto. Gregoire, however, has never named this assistant, nor produced any documentation of this relationship. This same personal assistant was, supposedly, killed in a mysterious hit-and-run accident outside St. Peter's, a few days after the death of his previous master. Again, no documentation has been offered to support this assertion. Gregoire's investigations claim to continue the work of Avro Manhattan, who he claims died in strange circumstances whilst visiting his familial home in South Shields, Tyne and Wear, in the United Kingdom. This claim is unsupported by the historical record. Gregoire asserts that Manhattan's death is one of the deaths allegedly associated with those who were close to, or supportive of, John Paul I. Gregoire's list of approximately 30 deaths includes papal predecessor Paul VI, the Belgian prelate Leon Joseph Swanens, Nicodem, the youthful Orthodox Metropolitan of Leningrad, and numerous senior members of the Swiss Guard. Tridentine Mass. According to the Catholic Traditionalist movement, their founder, Father Gamar de Pau, was to have gone to Rome to help John Paul I re-establish the Tridentine Mass. Stated on the 15th anniversary of the Pope's death, "Well, I tell you one thing, if he had remained Pope, you wouldn't have me here at the chapel, because with that beautiful official letter signed by the Secretary of State, also came an unofficial message that I better start packing my suitcase, that there was a job waiting for me in Rome, in the Vatican, to help Pope John Paul I bring the truth back to the Church. Well, it wasn't to be, and the Lord, who knows what he does, obviously wanted me to be in this chapel. What was I going to do in Rome? Well, let's just forget it." Other prominent traditionalist Catholic websites, not related to CTM, have suggested John Paul I may have been assassinated to prevent restoration of the Tridentine Mass. In popular culture, Malachi Martin's book Vatican, a novel, is a novel based on recent papal history. Although officially a work of fiction, Martin proposes the theory that the Pope was murdered by the Soviet Union because he would abdicate the benign policy of his two predecessors, John XXIII and Paul VI, towards accommodating communism, and once again condemn it as an atheistic totalitarian ideology. Martin believed that the church structure was infiltrated for decades by Illuminati agents who reached positions of high influence and rank, such as Jean-Marie Villot, at that time Cardinal Secretary of State. The Last Confession is a play written by Roger Crane. It is a thriller that tracks the dramatic tensions, crises of faith, and political maneuverings inside the Vatican surrounding the death of Pope John Paul I. The play toured the UK in the spring of 2007, before being transferred to the Theatre Royal, Haymarket, with the cast including David Suchet. It was subsequently broadcast on BBC Radio 4 on October 4, 2008. In October 2010 the play was brought to continental Europe by the Antwerp theatre group Dispelling. Suchet reprised the role at the Amundsen Theatre in Los Angeles in July 2014 and the Comedy Theatre in Melbourne in September 2014. The 1990 motion picture The Godfather Part 3 featured a story element depicting Société Générale Immobilier, the largest real estate company in the world, whose former largest shareholder was the Holy See and the Vatican Bank, involved in organized crime during and after the death of the old pope, and the election of a fictional cardinal named Lamberto to the papacy. Lamberto takes the papal name John Paul I and, like the real Pope John Paul I, he mysteriously dies. In The Company, a novel of the CIA by Robert Little, Pope John Paul I is murdered by a KGB hired killer.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.